Hey everybody, welcome to the 6th Annual Parent Network Workshop. We are pleased to have you join us for Trauma is More Than Abuse, understanding how TBRI helps kids and their families. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping items. If you have questions during this session, please use the Q&A feature that is located on the Zoom menu bar. And in the coming days, we're going to be posting the recording of this session along with our slides to link to helpful resources. And so please check back on idahoparentnetwork.org and feel free to share that with anyone you think will benefit. So we are having a couple of crazy technical difficulties this morning. So as I introduce our presenters, just want you to know Michelle Batten will be joining us in just a moment, and she is the Family Engagement Director from the Idaho Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. And then we also have Trisha Ellinger. Oh, look, there is Michelle. She just joined us. And then Trisha Ellinger and Amy Marie are both parents with the Idaho Parent Network, and they both have experience in the subject of trauma. So we are really looking forward to this today. And just quickly, we're going to turn it over to Michelle to kind of ringlead, and Trisha and Amy, and I will just turn myself off, and you guys have, let me know when you need me to change those slides for you.
All right. So one of the things I teach parents is using your left and right brain to calm down is a really great calming down thing. And you may have noticed my joining late and things. So one of the things I always teach calming down is if you use your right hand, it's connected to your left brain, your left hand to your right brain. So I tell kiddos and parents to squeeze alternating to calm yourself down. So I may be doing this under my desk in order to calm myself down after scrambling to get back up here. Anyways, I'm glad to be here. I'm pulling up my notes just this second, and I'm ready. I'm glad you guys are here to learn about TBRI. I am a TBRI educator and provide parents with training on TBRI, and I'm honored to be invited here to talk with Amy and Trisha. My work in mental health began with my own lived experience of growing up with foster siblings and an adopted sister from the foster system. I believed in hope and healing, but didn't see that occurring, and I was sent out from families from a ministry I had began to Texas Christian University to learn about TBRI. And that's when it really melded my background in child development and my education in that field, and then my understanding and belief in hope and healing, and seeing that unfold and understanding how development and trauma responsive parenting strategies played into that. So anyways, I'm excited to be able to share about that. So I'm going to put my notes on 2 screens so that you guys, I'm not covering up your faces and all the different pieces, and I will have Trisha and Amy introduce themselves as well. I see the introduction slide up there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michelle. I'm super excited to be here. So I originally came from I have a master's degree in social work, and I was a school counselor and a school social worker and also a therapist for many years. But as my journey in life moved on, I adopted a 3-sibling group. They were quite young. When they came to me permanently, they were 2.5, 1, and 4 months old. But I thought, I'm a professional. I know this stuff. I'd been trained in all kinds of parenting models. I had successfully helped hundreds of parents go through the difficulties of raising just children. And I realized as these kids were growing and developing that my parenting technique was not working. And so I tried everything, and I was directed to everything. I mean, book after book after book after book. And so, there's traditional parenting classes. They didn't work with my kids. There was autism parenting, which kind of worked with my autism kid, but not exactly. I got lots of things from therapists who said, try this. And we got lost in the labels. So if your kid's autistic, you should do this. If your kid is reactive attachment disorder, you should do this. If your child comes from anxiety, you should do this. The truth is my kids come from trauma. And that was a learning experience for me because I went into adopting these children thinking I was fully prepared. I understand kids. I understand what's going on for them. What I did not understand in my training and my work and my conferences is the trauma factor that occurs. It can happen in utero. It happens very early. All three of them experience different levels of trauma and have experienced some trauma just being siblings. There's some sibling trauma that occurs. And so I came across Michelle by accident 3 years ago and was so delighted to find something that I finally said, this clicks. This works for me and my kids. And I was so grateful. So thank you for that time, Michelle, to talk about that.
Yeah, of course.
Tricia,
And Amy?
so you want me to introduce myself? Okay.
Sure.
So my name is Amy and my husband and I, we have 8 children. 3 of my kids came from my first marriage and then my husband passed away. And then when I remarried, we decided to become foster adoptive parents through the Idaho foster care system. During that time, we ended up having 24 children in our home for various lengths of time. And we have 5 children that have joined our family through adoption. When we started out, my biological children already had trauma due to the passing of their dad. And there was already mental health concerns that were going on. And, but I felt that I understood pretty well. I had experience and always had a desire to adopt from the time that I was little. And I went into it back in 2009 under the impression that you just give a child love and care and structure, you give them safety, you give them consistency, and everything's going to be all right. Oh, and therapies, of course.
Of course.
And I really naively, as I think a lot of, foster parents go into it, not understanding trauma. I don't know if I even heard the word trauma because Idaho wasn't really trauma informed back then. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that we started hearing this word trauma. And, the first thing that a lot of us think of is PTSD. And we relate it to veterans. But what I've learned in the last, how long has it been? 12 years, that trauma can come from all sorts of places. And trauma changes the way that the brain develops. And it doesn't matter how young a child is when they come into your care. Just like Tricia said, in utero, there could be trauma. They don't have to remember the trauma for it to affect them. So I'm excited to join Michelle as she teaches us about TBRI and how it can help our families move forward. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. So the beginning parts of working with foster and adoptive have led me to my current job with Idaho Federation of Families. And I currently am the Family Engagement Director, and I provide, through the arm of FY Idaho, I provide education and support to parents. And really, I'll keep saying this, and this is one of the things of today, is I really believe that because this is a developmental model, and as Amy mentioned, her other kids had trauma, that this is something that is useful, I would say, in all relationships. And I'll touch on that later, but TBRI is really important. As far as what is trauma, well, Amy, I think you touched on that, right? Like that it's not just, okay, foster and adoption. We know that they have these traumas, and probably if they're in foster, that means that there was some kind of abuse or neglect. That category, we know those are traumas.
Right.
But there's this whole other piece, right? When we talk about trauma, we include with TBRI, I'll go into a little further than this, but with TBRI, we define it as in utero, birth traumatic birth experience, early medical, and then we also do talk about abuse and neglect. But those first three, that traumatic pregnancy, traumatic birth, and early medical, my firstborn experienced all that. I was finishing grad school. We moved 4 times. We had to find a doctor 6 weeks before he was born. I mean, it just keeps going. But anyways, that's a lot of cortisol on that little brain. And so he was born really intense. And no one told me that. I thought all babies spit up everything they ate. I thought all babies cried all day long. And I was someone with a background in child development, just hadn't worked with babies. So I say that because if I had known about trauma responsive parenting, my strategies for parenting him would have looked different. And I believe things might have been unfolded quite differently for him. So trauma isn't just those capital T traumas that almost everyone would say, but there's a lot of little t traumas. And I would say things even become big T traumas when it involves relationships and when there's relational trauma. And what I mean by that is when, whether it's because the parent isn't in a relationship where this is able, or because of circumstances in the family that this isn't able, when a youth can't come to a safe person, a safe adult, then that's traumatic, right? I'll give you an example. When I was little, I was what would be categorized now as bullied because I walk with my feet slightly out. And so there's this boy in 3rd grade who constantly called me penguin. It really upset me. I went to my mom though, and I was able to talk to her about that. And she came up with this idea that I don't know if I participated in coming up with this idea, but somehow she got me to buy into this idea that I liked penguins. And so I still have penguins on my countertop now. And like, it became something. I do walk with my feet out, and that didn't become something upset. It just, it became part of my identity of I like penguins and I walk with my feet out. That wasn't traumatic bullying, right? It's not okay, but it wasn't traumatic bullying because somehow I had a relationship to process that with. Kids don't have the ability to process these things. So now I will say for whatever reason, that's not always because of the grown-up in the kid's life, right? Sometimes that kid can't do it because there's a lot, the parents who are here today, there's a lot going on in your homes. And I see that and I know that, and that's why we need community. And that's why we need other safe adults so that, or therapists, right? That our child can go to and have time and space to find healing in that. So anyways, that's what I consider trauma and how I look at it. So next slide. So TBRI. So in our TBRI work, there's really, I'm going to talk about it and then I'm going to let Tricia tell a little bit about what she discovered about TBRI. TBRI is a trauma responsive, developmentally respectful parenting intervention. It did come out of the foster and adoptive community originally. Dr. Purvis at TCU was a researcher who was passionate because she was a foster parent, and she developed some methods, and you can learn about those in The Connected Child and actually The Connected Parent as well. Those are 2 books that she authored. But anyways, she wrote about these, and what I love is she took them from the research level and evidence-based practice and brought them into a practical way of delivering them through the Connected Child to parents, and then has trained a group TBRI practitioners and educators to bring that information into communities. And it is practiced in OTs, it is practiced in PTs, in some residential, in just a variety of professions where schools where people are working with children. And so that trauma responsive and relational model works well in a lot of different spaces. And that's part of what I just get excited about. The basis of TBRI is connection, and based on the attachment theories in child development. And then we look a lot about empowerment. That's giving, helping kids understand external and internal cues on what's happening and why they're responding the way they do. And helping parents understand that, of course. And then, of course, correction. We can't have parenting without some correction. It's not all giving yeses. And so understanding all of that. So Tricia, tell us about your journey with TBRI. I love that piece of it and how it fits into your family.
What I like about TBRI is that it's always about relationship. And so maintaining that connectedness. And that's a flavor of parenting that you see through all kinds of different good parenting models, is that, building that relationship. But it's also about what you bring to the parenting of this child and being aware of how you're responding. And so I think for me is the biggest thing that I took out of TBRI was the concept of a redo, and which is your child comes up to you and says, "Give me a cupcake," and you say, "Well, I think you need to redo that," and you model it for them. "I would like a cupcake, please," and you give them that opportunity to respond and correct their way. They're being more respectful in their communication with you. And I've actually said to my kids, when I've overreacted, I've said to them, "Mom needs a redo. Give me a chance to redo that," because I was upset and I asked in a very angry voice, "Can I have a redo?" And there's some correction and some connection that's happening there. A lot of the good parenting models talk about offering choices and compromise, being flexible. My adult kids will tell you that I am the warden. Okay, that's my parenting style, is the warden. You're going to follow the structure and the expectations in our family. And what I found with these kids, the warden doesn't work. Okay, so it is approaching things with love and compassion, compromise, always first, number one, allowing for that self-regulation to occur. My kids get dysregulated quite easily. They can be triggers to each other, and so they get dysregulated. So before I attempt anything with TBRI, I have to make sure I'm regulated and that they're regulated, and that I might have to co-regulate with them. I might, and it's being right in their space and being appropriate. So that's kind of my experience with TBRI. It was all the good things that are out there in the world as far as parenting goes, in a very nice, gentle way. But that's the way I look at, that's the way I kind of look at TBRI, is it's less abrasive, because I knew I couldn't be the warden anymore. The warden was not, and my two adult kids are very successful, but they still say, "Mom, you were a warden." And so when they see my parenting style with these kids, they have a difficult time with it, because they're like, "Mom, just lay the hammer down." Like, there's no hammer in TBRI.
Well,
Really,
I like what you guys have said about TBRI, and especially when Tricia was talking about, if you have a children with autism, you're supposed to do this. If you have a children coming from this, you're supposed to do that. And I had read several books and had met with multiple therapists. And the thing that we struggled with, which a lot of parents do that have multiple children with multiple mental health concerns or trauma, is that as I'm trying to do one with one child, it can be triggering to another child. And I like this idea about TBRI, how it works in all relationships, and it's the approach that you use, and it's developmentally on target, and it doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, because it can be so overwhelming, and trying so many new things and feeling like you're constantly failing. So I appreciate the hope that TBR brings.
It's funny you say that. It can be useful in all relationships. I had said that at the beginning, and I really think it's true, because it's about connection. It's about offering compassion to understand where the other person's coming from, right? And it's about letting people have an opportunity to try again. So a lot of times when I'm helping families, I look at the way I need to regulate and then look at infant needs. And so I always say that TBRI as an adult is great, it is really good to give someone else a redo. It's wise not to say to a spouse, would you like to try that again? But
Yeah.
it's really wise to have that culture of, let's try it again, right? Like, let's go into this. And well, I really said that wrong. Can I say that again? So that culture in a family is really great. And so I've appreciated being able to think through these things in other relationships.
Well, and I think when I first heard the concept of a redo, I was confused because so many other people will say, no, you have to be consistent and, you have to follow through. And those ways of doing things didn't give you an opportunity to take a step back and realize that, like, when we would overreact as parents, whoa, now I have to follow through. And that was totally like too much or over,
we're not even dealing with the right issue, right, Amy? Sometimes
right, exactly.
We respond and go, oh,
and
wait,
then you would feel like you would have, well, I got to be consistent because that's what kids needs. And they have to trust that my word is my bond. And so we're going to follow through, even if I, realize that was not an appropriate reaction or consequence. And so I like that concept of TBRI and just the way that we go about our relationships. We can have redos and just looking at it in a different way. And I think a lot of times for me, it just takes a little paradigm shift in my mind to make it okay. Like, no, this is why this is helpful. This is a better way of doing it. And I'm not letting go of some value of always being consistent, always being right, always being, having all the answers. So it helps to have that shift.
Yeah.
What you described is how I parented as the warden.
Yeah.
I've got to be consistent. I've got to follow through. I've got to.
Yep.
My neurotypical kids, that worked.
Right.
Because you get more margin. You get more margin with neurotypical.
Yeah, they were bonded to me, strongly bonded to me. And so that they were more responsive. And with these kids, all of these concepts that you see here, a redo, choices, compromise, time in, there's been times where with my son with autism that, well, I guess I'd have to say all three of my kids, is that I just have to sit in the space with them. We're sitting in the space together. And sometimes I call it a time in, but really it's just being in that moment with them and helping them self-regulate. Instead of saying, you go to your room, I'm done. Not going to happen. You're going to go do 8 minutes because you're 8 years old. See you later.
Because that's what the formula told me to do.
That's what they said. And so, and it's not about, honey, you're having a hard time. And so this model really goes back to the behavior is communication. Are we meeting their needs where they're at? Do they need a drink? Do they need some crackers? Are you getting their physiological needs met?
Right.
We haven't talked about this, but their environment is there. I'm telling you, I started to decorate for Halloween and autumn, and I've forgotten that's very decorating for holidays is very triggering for my autistic son. Last year, we had to take down all the Christmas decorations.
Because it's changed, Tricia?
The environment did not work for him. So I have to be sensitive to that. So it's environmentally, if that's a triggering thing for him, I can create an environment that's comfortable, safe, and calm, because that's what he needs. And so that's part of TBRI. They teach you all those things to look at and always go back to relationship. Am I connected? Am I meeting their needs?
I love that. And the time in piece, I used to do very much that timeout model of sending them away, because surely you can learn the skills on your own if I send you to your room and you'll calm down, right? Now, to be fair, we get more margin, like I said, with neurotypical kids, and it doesn't, we all grew up and here we are. So, but I've got to say that when I started using this model, and the first day I said, hey, come sit next to me. You're out of control. Let's calm down and figure this together. He looked at me and said, you don't even like me when I'm like this, so why don't you just send me away? And I was like, oh no, you didn't even hear Dr. Purvis talking about that, right? Like, how did you know that that's what she told me you were thinking? So he had enough verbal that he could express that, but I never thought that him going and sitting on the stairs was that punitive model was making him think that I didn't like him. And the truth is probably 90% of the time with this kid, when I sent him to the stairs to sit there for a few minutes, he fell asleep. Like the need behind his behaviors always was a lack of sleep. So that tells me, right, that if I could give him that space to meet that need, he was okay, right? And able to do that. So figuring out what those needs are behind the behaviors. Can we go back one slide? Because I'm just going to use that model just to talk about correction for a second. Thank you. All right, so you see these things scattered on here, and I really wanted to put these on here just to introduce concepts. When I talk with parents, these often are like, are you kidding me? I'm not giving this kid any power, because when I give an inch, he takes 30 miles. It's not even a mile, he takes 30 miles, or she. And so that I recognize that, but I'm going to use this language and recognize that there's this culture of sharing power versus giving them power. And so that's really what this is about. And as we talk about redos or choices in compromise or time in, it's matching the arousal level of the child. So as they get more aroused, that we're handling it differently because of their needs. And so a redo isn't just to the kid who's already all over the floor, melted in a puddle, screaming, kicking, or worse behaviors. It's really about not their behaviors, but what's happening inside. And so a redo is for that kiddo, we can redirect quickly. Like, hey, did you just ask me or tell me for that cupcake? I think that was your example, Tricia. And for some kids, that's a simple, oh, I meant to ask you, let me ask you, right? Or they can learn that. Whereas for other kids, they want that food now. I didn't get food when I was little, and this is all out warfare. You're taking my food or not, that's what I wanted, right? And so they're already at the top of what I call the mountain. So understanding who your kid is and having this consistent sharing of power, because the truth is while it feels scary to share some power and learn how to do that, the truth is in the end, this is a piece of what we want. We want our children to be able to go to their peers. We want them to be able to go to their bosses. We want them to be able to go to people who they're in significant relationships and say, I don't like that. Or can I do it this way? Or can you extend that date? Or whatever that is that's done in that relationship. And so we want them to practice what shared power looks like. So those are some of those concepts. Do you have any thoughts on those concepts that are up there, Tricia?
Actually, I had a question. How does it look like, a lot of our families have multiple children. How does it look like in a situation where there's multiple children involved that are dysregulated because they trigger one another? And what does it look like when we're talking about behaviors that are dangerous and very unsafe for the child, for their siblings, for the parents? Because we have a lot of families out there that we serve that are, we're not talking about, I want a cupcake and I didn't ask nicely. We're talking about very dangerous situations. And so I would like to, hear what you have to say, how do we apply that in that kind of situation?
So when I teach this, I have a mountain I use, and on the first, down at the bottom is this pool of water. And I say this, all kids know, this is the playful area, right? I used to go into homes and teach this using play. And then this little bump right here, this next level of the mountain is where we're just a little dysregulated. And so that would be the redo. And then the next level would be the choices and compromise. That kind of is on the same level of inability to regulate. And then the time in and needing co-regulation, and then the mountaintop explosion. So while the redo might work for some children with about a cupcake, I think both of you probably know, since you have kids from backgrounds with early trauma, that cupcake actually means life and death to that kid because it's food, right? And so it might mean guns a-blazing. So it's not, while that example works with some kids being able to regulate, some kids it's like absolute escalation. And we need those safety plans, which you guys are talking about later, right? Like we need the keep everyone safe plans. And I also think that a lot of kids get almost to the top of the volcano. So that time in, and I don't call it even, that's just the example of the method. I don't even call it that at that level, but this, I think TBRI calls it level 3 engagement. But that level 3, not level 4 explosion, but level 3, a lot of kids just go from the playing in the water to level 3, like not even, right? Like they just go boom.
Okay.
So
But-
quickly.
So
Yep.
quickly.
So let me explain. So let me give you an example of an 8, 9, and 10-year-old. Okay. And so they all have their own labels. Okay. But they all are biological siblings and they come from this trauma nest.
Yep.
And they've been with me for a long time. And yet, so they could be jumping on the trampoline and having a good time, and someone gets tripped and hits their head on the bar. Okay. Then it's this big deal. You did that on purpose, attacking, physically attacking, strangling, whatever.
Right.
And this is what I do. This is what I do as a parent. So I have 3 kids. I tell the 2 kids, I check them for injuries, bleeding, head, what
Mhm.
does this need immediate attention, ice pack, whatever. And then they know, because I've trained them, you need to go to a safe place. So my bedroom is a safe place and their own bedrooms are a safe place, and they can lock those doors.
Yep.
So I need you to go wherever you're feeling safe right now. I need you to go to that place. And they, my oldest son, he always goes to his room. That's his territory. And I'm so excited because then the other, there's always one that wants to go to my room, mom's room. But then, so the one that's left on the trampoline is, you're allowing that they're getting all that anger, and you're with them in that moment.
Mhm.
And there's not a lot of verbal exchanging, like, get down, stop it, you've
Right.
ruined everything, you're so naughty. That language is not present.
Right.
The language is more like, I'm so sorry this happened. Let me help you solve this problem.
Mm.
What do you think happened? Now my kids will tell you 3 different things happened, sometimes 4.
Yeah. Everyone
And
has their own story.
This is it. What that child that's totally at the top of the volcano, once they can come down to the place and say, their truth is, she shoved me. And I'm like, okay, she shoved you, and I'm really sorry that happened. Sometimes that happens on the trampoline. Next time, what can we, as they're calming down, and it doesn't happen in 30 seconds. I'm describing it in a
Right.
30-second thing, but
Yeah.
for time purposes, anyway.
We don't have 3 days.
Right, that you're going through this process and saying, I'm really sorry that happened. We have some choices about the trampoline. You can play on it alone. So, you're going through this, you're walking with them back into the house. You might be saying to them, hey, you know what? You got really upset. Let's get a drink. Hey, I've got some Oreos over here. So you're meeting their needs and kind of distracting them from their problem and getting them regulated back to, so this is a process. So my kids, because I've trained them, you need to stay in that safe place until I deal with this one child. And then I'm going to come and validate you. I don't say those words to them, but I come back to them, and their truth is, he's just stupid. He's just mean. He's just rotten. I don't like it. I know sometimes my brothers and sisters are mean and rotten and stupid. I'm sorry. But we can do this again. We can have another chance. I don't let my kids go back to the trampoline after that event, that particular day. We take it to another day and say, hey, there were some unexpected things that happened last time. Let's talk about that. And so in my experience is that, but then it's very labor intensive on the parents' part. And I have, my adult son lives with me. And so he might be helping regulate one of the other kids who's just going a little bit wild. And just sitting with them and saying, mom is going to be here in a few minutes. Or he might come to me and say, I'm going to have to take this kid because you got to have that kid. Right. So we swap, because he might have a different relationship with this other kid. And he's saying, she's out of control and I can't help her. She's not listening to me. We're not connecting. And so we swap. And so that's kind of, when you look at that mountain, you really have to, and I went to this, it was an accidental thing. I think it was on a website. It might've been Federation's website. And I was like, I'm missing something in my life. But once you kind of go and hear these presenters like Michelle, she was a facilitator of it, it makes more sense. And it actually feels natural once you're willing to give up the power and the control. And you want to have this relationship with your kids, and you want them to understand and problem solve. You want to compromise about how the situation could be handled differently next time. So sometimes I'll say, it's very rarely that I do this, but we all get to do a redo. Let's all go back out to the trampoline, get on the trampoline, show me what it looks like when we're all having fun. And then allow, I've done this with park time. Okay, we're all getting in the car and we're gonna go talk about this and get ourselves regulated and do a redo. The redo means that they get to go back to the park. And so they're not losing it, they're not going home. They get an opportunity to correct their behaviors so that we can all have an enjoyable time. What I have found is that I have to validate each one of my kids.
They need to be seen, heard, and
well,
valued. Right?
Yeah, and so I always make sure the other kids are safe, they're in their place. And I might say to them, get yourself a drink and a snack while I'm dealing with this. But if it's an environment like our kitchen is our main area, they may not have that opportunity. But it's basically go to your rooms, be safe, get your stuffies, get whatever it is that you need. And then once we're all safe and I've managed this situation, I'm going to come and I want to hear what you have to say. And I just validate their truth. I'm not saying, no, he said you shoved him. I'm not fighting about that. I'm validating their truth.
Right.
Because it's their story. It's what they believe. And so then you go into the choices and the compromise and the opportunities for redo, because you're going to just battle. If you keep on trying to convince them of your truth, it's not going to work. You have to go back in.
How do you get buy-in from, whether it be the other parents? You guys are on.
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
I like
about that.
About how this can work in occupational therapy, speech therapy, in the classroom. How do you get buy-in so everyone can consistently be working with this child? Because we know that that's when the success comes. If we're all consistently modeling this behavior and these choices, so they know what to expect, especially our trauma kiddos. They need to know that they can rely on us to be predictable.
And they begin to predict it like this, right? They begin to understand that when they're a little dysregulated, you're offering choices because their brain needs, they can't use the full front of their brain. And so you need to structure things. And they begin to realize that when you're teaching, and I'll talk about how we integrate this, that you'll start to ask them if they have a compromise, because I want to give you a yes, but what could you say? Because that's not a yes. Or they begin to understand what time and right. But I think we hear what you say, Tricia, and I go, I know so many parents, because of the parents I've worked with, go, right, that's great for you, but I don't have two people at the same time. Or how in the world do you even begin? Where do you begin? Because Amy, if you started this with 8 kids today, I know what it would be chaos, right? I recognize that. And so the piece of how do we integrate this in families, and then how do we teach it? Some of that is proactive teaching and breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, that we don't do the whole thing at once. What are some little actionable things? And even just a redo and starting off with that. I used to teach TBRI in homes to foster and adoptive families. And I would go in and we'd use a lot of play. And I kind of had 8 weeks that I broke this into, and then took it and used play every week, whether it would be with games, and I would do dysregulating games, and then calming games, where then I would teach them the left-right hand squeeze that I talked about. And then I would teach them, hey, let's talk about what happens when you ask for something in a silly way. Let's practice with mom the wrong way and the right way. And let's just do the simple redo. And so I would teach, I would use books, I would do play, I would do, so teaching those things, not in the moment, because if you do it when you're on the trampoline, no one's going to their safe space. They want payback, right? Yeah. No one, and especially the person who's the most dysregulated will chase after the kid, right? They want that engagement because they're already agitated, and that's what their system is needing. So I think that taking those steps back for our own families to help them understand. And then there's so many resources to learn about TBRI. YouTube, the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development has a lot of 3 to 5 minute YouTube videos. I always give those to couples as the homework assignment, because I have a whole library of TBRI videos, which is probably, I don't know, 40 hours, 60 hours, I don't know how many hours worth of it. No one can watch other people's trauma kids screaming, right? Like I recognize that. But 3 minutes is a doable conversation between the people who are parenting in the house. So when you watch one on what is TBRI and it's 5 minutes, you can have a conversation about that. If you give that to your therapist, they can start to pursue that professionally, right? Not everyone, finding someone who understands that language, it is really different than behavior modification. It's a different method, and that modification piece is useful for some kids, right? Like we can't deny that every parenting strategy doesn't work for every child. But I will say that this is developmental. And so when I listen to Tricia say, I think you said 10-year-old, was one of your kids 10, Tricia? Yeah. I think, actually his trauma age is 5. And so I need to interact with a 5-year-old, right? So then when I bring it to a 5-year-old and think of what a redo looks like for a 5-year-old, I can do that. So, but beginning those mind shifts and mindset changes is really important. And I think that the videos, if you're a book learner, there's plenty of books. If you're a research article person, I'll get you those. Like there's really a lot of information out there to glean from a lot of different places. And so every year there's a training throughout Idaho. There's different places that offer it. Typically it's in church settings that it's sponsored, but all different faiths. And if you're interested,
go to learn about those trainings. Like, is there if it's always offered yearly, is it something that the Federation puts on their website?
No, but I will. It's called Show Hope. It's called Show Hope is the current sponsors. But the person in Idaho, the place that sponsors it is the Fostering Idaho. I was trying to think of their name. Okay. Fostering Idaho sponsors it, and statewide puts it in all different places. So I think, Tricia, that's where you had learned it was was that place. And it began. Go ahead.
I just wanted to speak to how do you get someone else to do buy-in. So my son is 25 and he was in the military for 4 years. So, turned 18. Right, exactly. And so the warden concept was really good, follow the rules, do exactly. And so I role modeled to him. He saw that my new parenting strategy was much more effective with these kids. And it's difficult for him to do it naturally because he's always shifting in his brain. When you're in the military and they train you to be compliant, follow the rules, it's a shift in his brain. But when he sees me do it, you can actually see his body physically relax. He can see mom is regulated. I can be regulated. I can help her regulate these kids and I can reconnect with them in a playful way. So one of the safe things is, uncle's here, do you want to go to his room and play a video game? He's connecting with them, getting them kind of off of what happened. They're safe, and so there's things that once you have buy-in and you feel good about it, that just role modeling and saying, and like she said, share those 3-minute video clips, talk about it. Do you like this? Do you not like this? Let's practice. What do you think this is going to be like? Because honestly, since I've done TBRI and safety and crisis planning, I feel more confident as a parent. I feel like as a single parent of 3 very difficult children, I feel like I can do this. Instead of before, it's like, okay, my autism kid, I got to do this. And my rad kid, I got to do this. And, oh, she's anxious. And
it's too much.
This is a model that just works.
I had something that popped in my head a second ago. Amy, do you have any
She was
more
just-
questions?
There was a question here that says, how can I find the YouTube
Oh.
clips?
Oh, well, give me a second and I'd be happy to. Every time I just search YouTube TBRI. That's,
Yes.
I know I should make a list of them all, but that's what I search or YouTube Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development. One of those two things will get you exactly what you need.
And she
Yes,
has a very
Karen Purvis.
voice.
What's that?
Karen has a very calming voice.
Oh,
Yes.
she's like, you just have to think about her in order to present or in order to, she's just she did have a peaceful voice. Interestingly, The Connected Connected Child is a book she wrote. I actually not, it's over here on my shelf. And I'm not sure how long ago it was published, but Karen Purvis died in April or early in 2016.
Right.
And Lisa Qualls, who's a parent in Idaho with children with mental health needs, actually began a book back then with Dr. Purvis. And they actually just published it a year ago, postmortem for Dr. Purvis, and Lisa had edited her work. So that's The Connected Parent. There's also a book called The Connected Therapist. That's really valuable too. That might be a good gift, Amy, to those therapists who, after they're curious. So those are three really great book resources that target different groups. And obviously, like when I teach TBRI, it's over 12 hours, 16, right? Like it's a lot of, there's a lot to it. Like we've just used an hour just to touch on the what it overall is, but I'm always excited to teach about that. So if we got a group of parents, we could do it.
Trisha, have you been able to incorporate that like in the educational setting with IEPs and 504s when you're having those conversations with
Right.
the team,
And so,
team members? How does that
so,
been for you?
so I've told them, this is the common language that we use.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk about redos and choices and compromises. So it's been very interesting because it's been a journey with my school district. But a couple of weeks ago, two of my kids were, my 9-year-old told my autistic son, let's make a break for it. And, they were then corralled into this room. And so they called me and I come in and I just calmly sit down, and I'm modeling to them TBRI concepts. And the principal said in a meeting later that day that just happened to be scheduled, he goes, it was like magic. Those kids regulated, they responded. The 9-year-old went and did what she was supposed to do. And I chose for my autistic son, once he hits the volcano, he needs what I call a hard reset. Leave the school environment where the demands are constant, come home where the demands are less, do a hard reset and do a whole complete redo the next day. And so he's like, the principal was like, it was the most magic thing that I saw. And she, mom said, let's do a redo. And the kids are all, and I said, well, this is what we do. This is the language. And so I think when they see the magic in person, that it can be modeled, that they are more willing to be open. But definitely in an IEP and a BIP, you can say, this is the language that we use. This, and I want this language used.
I love that.
And so we have, escalation levels within our BIP. And so there's that, I'm using that language, compromise at this certain level. Because when she gets to this level, at this level, you can be playful, silly, and make, there's different levels. And so they don't know that I'm doing that.
Right.
I don't march in there and say, well,
You're at
according to
level
my
one.
TBR and manual, you need to do this. I just put it in and say, this is the language that we use. And I think it would be helpful if we write into their plans so that other people can see this is the language. But then when they see me role model it, I don't charge in there with both barrels blazing to pick up my kids. I have to do a reset for myself.
Yeah.
I have to get calm. I have to go to the school and then demonstrate this is not a life and death situation. This can be resolved. We want the children to go back to the classroom, and this is how you do it. So that's the point, is that for me, you can't shove it down their throats because they're not going to be open to that. But role modeling and saying, I like this language. This is what we use at home. Let's insert it. And so that's the way that it's worked for me. And they don't even know they're doing TBRI.
Right.
You know, they're not even realizing that they're using concepts of TBRI, and that's totally okay with me. But I can see it in their plans.
I love that, Tricia, and helping them move that direction and giving them language that is in modeling. I mean, that's really how I teach parents, right? Is to, when I'm saying I'm going into their homes and doing play, it's just because I get the only way I could use that play is with the parent buying in and the kid buying in, and then everyone's learning it through that modeling thing. So always coming back to that relationships and always the need behind the behavior. I created a little workbook for this, and I think if I remember correctly, the last page had a list of resources, so that's great too, that we have that. I can't remember how that's being distributed, but always looking at those, always looking at what is the need behind the behavior. Tricia talked about, her kids might need water and food. I don't know their story, but assuming because they came to her early, those things may have been scarce very, very early in their lives, and that will always be a need that dysregulates their body. When they get thirsty, they won't even know that that's why they're falling apart, right? It's not that much different than when we're standing in the line after work, we're picking up dinner, and our kid asks for the candy bar the third time. That this is a more typical parenting thing, and I turn around and snap that it's because I'm hungry, right? It's not because of other things. It's just I could have eaten and that would have solved this problem. We all have those moments. So recognizing that these are even bigger for these kids with these needs. So beginning to learn what are those needs behind the behavior, because when we teach them what those needs are, they can say, I need to go get a drink of water, right? Eventually that's where they get. So that's really great. All right, any other pieces? I'm looking at the time.
Well, I think Laura just popped in that the workbook that you talked about was on the registration page on our website. And it will also be part of the after the presentation materials. Perfect. So people when they on the registration page for this particular piece is there. So
super.
So do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Michelle or Tricia. I have a question, just because, I've heard of TBRI. I've watched some of those videos. I have not been trained in it. So of course I bring the curiosity piece. That's the parent I'm representing. What do you do when, I think it's important for kids to recognize what the need behind the behavior is. What do you do when kids use those as avoidance? Like, for example, I have a kiddo who is 12. He has autism and multiple mental health disorders and has a lot of trauma. And so he's not potty trained. And he at school this year, he's doing really great. But in more recent years, he would use bathroom breaks as an avoidance tactic to get out of class or to do assignments that he didn't want to do. And before he used to just have accidents. So at least, he's graduating his words. Bathroom. But how do you balance that when kiddos, or same couple of kiddos, with that child neglect at a very young age? Food is a big deal, and constantly wanting to eat and helping them set boundaries and self-regulate. Am I actually hungry, or am I just wanting to eat? Because when you have kiddos that eat until they throw up, or they hoard food, or, they haven't gotten past that baseline need of thinking that they always need food, how does TBRI help with that?
So it's really, I think that a lot of families have found it useful to have a yes bin. So a bin that they can say yes, apples and
Right.
healthy type things that you only actually cheese
You
sticks,
can
but
have as many apples and oranges as you want, honey. And
right? Or, oh, I'd love to say yes to you having a snack right now. What types of snacks could you ask for? So that's a compromise, but it's saying, I want to say yes to you, which puts a different spin than no, right? Because that no is you holding back on something that is life-giving to them, right? I mean, the way your child probably reacts to that.
Yeah.
And so I want to say yes. What could you have? That would be one way to do that. I also think that what's hard to remember at the beginning, this isn't true forever, but for a while, what's hard is to recognize that we need to feed kiddos from hard places, just like we do an infant, which is 2 or 3 hours. A protein snack every 2 or 3 hours. That's a lot and exhausting, right? Now, it's not a whole meal, but having that piece helps them regulate their eating systems, for lack of the words not coming to me, but helps them regulate their internal systems. And that means that they don't feel that trigger of, I'm dying, I need food, and I need to fight for the life. One of the things in my, you mentioned, Amy, you were told, if you just parent this way, it'll all be fine, is that my sister adopted in the 70s was, my parents were told, you have a good home, a good education, and a great church community, you're good. She'll be fine. She came to you at 11 months of age. What worse could, that's too early. Well, that wasn't the case. And one of the things that just made my mom batty was food hoarding. She always found wrappers under the mattresses. She always told my sister there were going to be bugs in our house because of my sister. And it's funny, I don't remember there being bugs ever, but that was the threat, right? And that is it's just not okay to have food in your room and under your mattress. But if I think about my sister's early now, I think about that early first year, and every time she had visitations, it was the 70s. So for 5 more years, that's a lot. That's a lot of no food. That's a lot of no drink. And that's why she was taken at 11 months. And so that might be the very reason. That is the very reason she needed to keep those things. That's the need behind the behavior, right? She needed to feed herself because no one else was going to do it.
So before we wrap up, I just wanted to go to the comments that have.
Yes,
they want to know, how do we find information on the free training that you spoke of? And someone asked if TBRI, what age can you start it? And Trisha said you can use it at all ages, and that's the beautiful thing about it.
That is, because it's developmental. It's a great way to interact. I will tell you that a lot of the training videos are with elementary school kids, but they've moved into teenagers. And if it's a developmental model, we can just look at what does a child need and how do we engage with a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old.
Right.
Well, we want to thank you guys so much for joining us today, Michelle Batten and Trisha. We are so glad that you guys were able to share your personal stories with us from a professional side and from a parent side. And I'm excited to learn more about TBRI, and hopefully there are other parents that are listening here will feel some hope from this conversation, and providers or state employees, whoever's joining us today. I think there's something new for all of us to learn. So
yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm putting in the there.
Oh,
it's recording. Ta-da.
Oh,
it is recording. I thought we were already, okay, there you go. Go ahead, Michelle. She didn't stop it.
Yep, there's the link for the Show Hope for the Journey conference.
Okay. All right. Thank you.